pimple on my tongue. In today's Necron video, we are going to have a chat about how I went about changing my core Necron list in hope that my thought process will give you some ideas when building your list. And it's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, today we are looking at the new core Necron list that I have. So of course we've had chapter approved with some point changes, we've had some new missions, and things have changed a bit. Plus, well, my first core list was never the final list, it was just my starting point. So what I'm going to do today is have a look at the first list, discuss all of the units, how they performed and my thoughts about them, maybe going forward, and then have a look at my new list. So let's do it. Okay, so here is my list, the core Necrons. If you want to find out more about the initial list and how I got on after my first game, there's a couple of videos that I've previously made, and I'll link those up in the description below for you. But I made this list centered around the data slate update, where a lot of the Necron units got the core keyword. So I thought it would be pretty cool to make a list around the core keyword, and the tactics that I wanted to try was Illuminor with 2 big squads of destroyers, allowing me to buff them and also to bring back 1 destroyer in each unit each turn. Pretty cool sounding. However, how did the list get on? Well, I've played 3 games now, 2 against Orcs. I won one of those and I lost one, and 1 against the Thousand Suns. Now, if I was recommending to you how many games to play before you start changing a list, if you're fairly new to the game, I would recommend playing more games to really get a feel of how the army and the units are working. Personally, as quite an experienced player, I feel that 3 games is enough for me to start tinkering with the list. Okay, so let's have a look at my original list. Now, I have to say, I have changed the list slightly from the original list because of the points changes. They happened just before I played a game. I had 90 points to spend and I just added in a unit for 90 points. However, that wasn't my sort of final list, but it was an indicator to me how I might change the list, which we'll look at in a second. So, this is the Soulless Dynasty, which is a custom dynasty. Eternal Conquerors for Objective Secure, and Relentless Expansionist for the pre-game move. Objective Secure for me was very important for this list because I didn't plan on having troops, because I wanted to try out all of the other core units. So no troops, Objective Secure was sort of very, very clear to me that that's the dynasty that I wanted. And it's also very clear for me from playing the games that this dynasty is really, really useful. So I'm definitely not changing that. Relentless Expansionist, the pre-game move is again a pretty useful thing to have, just to be able to basically redeploy. It's not quite as useful if you're going second, but it is very useful if you're going first. So that is going to stay. Now my first HQ is the Command Barge, with the Gauss cannon underneath, and to be fair, he's performed as I would expect him to do. He has the relic, the Voltic Staff, which is a fantastic relic, especially for the Command Barge. I've got the Warlord trait, Thrall of the Silent King, to give me the ability to extend my aura abilities and my will be done abilities, and with the Stratagem, Hand of the Fair Run for 2 CPs, of course, allowing me to do that my will be done twice. Very useful. 12-inch my will be done and a 9-inch aura for that +1 to movement. He's performed very well, and in this list he goes with my 2 units of wraiths just to help with their weapon skill when they actually assault. So I'm thinking I'm going to keep him in the list going forward, assuming the other units stay in the list. Then we have Illuminor Xerus, which let's face it, he sounds really, really good, but I think a lot of you already knew that he probably wasn't the best choice in the world, and after 3 games I can concur that he's not the best choice in the world. I have to say he's fun, he's a great miniature, and I enjoyed playing him, but there's a few issues. So, of course, he can do right reanimation twice, which is great, and I had him next to my destroyers. But what it meant is my destroyers were quite tied to being next to him, so I had to have them working as a blob. And whilst it worked, I wasn't quite free enough to be able to do different things on the table if I needed to. So the list was a little bit too one-dimensional with the Luminor there. Plus, he is able to augment units. You can have either +1 to strength, +1 to toughness, +1 to ballistic skill. I had no success with this. I always rolled the wrong one. When I used this on my wraiths, I gave them +1 to ballistic skill. It's very, very random, and it just didn't work. I mean, if you get really lucky and you get +1 to ballistic skill on your destroyers, then great. But after 3 games and using this Illuminor 3 times, and Illuminor pretty much survived most of the game. Yeah, that buff just wasn't really doing anything. So I'm thinking Illuminor is out, and I think the obvious choice to replace him, which we will have a look in a minute when we look at my final list, would be 2 Technomancers at the same points cost, and of course 2 separate units, and the destroyer units don't have to be within a certain range of this 1 miniature. Now I also had 2 Crypto Thralls in the list, although I've just put them in the HQ units, of course. They're sort of unaligned as such. So yeah, 2 Crypto Thrall units, and they were there to help protect Illuminor. So that was them. Plus I had 40 points left over, and they seemed to work quite well. Right, let's have a look at the Elites slot. So in the Elite slot we had 4 Skorpek Destroyers. But I was using my Skorpek Destroyers in a totally different way to maybe how you would expect them to be used. I was using them defensively, so basically going on a backfield objective, along with some Scarabs, which we'll look at in a second, and they were there to counter-assault, primarily. I went for 4 because I just felt that 3 just wasn't quite enough, and I have to say, from the experience after the 3 games, I can concur. It's not quite enough, because I was finding that 3 were getting wiped out quite a bit, but 1 was surviving. So whilst I potentially could drop that down to 3, as it's a slightly different role to an attacking role, I felt that 4 probably was still the right amount for that. Now the flayed ones are there, and they're my extra 90-point unit. A nice little distraction unit. They sit in the Elites slot without me having to take a different detachment, because I am locked into the Outrider detachment, and the reason for that is because of my fast attack choices. So my fast attack choices were these. We had 2 units of 6 Wraiths, and again they were designed to go out and attack along with Catacomb Command Barge. Then we had 3 units of Scarabs, a small unit of 6 to sit on backfield objectives, and the 2 large units of 9. They were there primarily to bubble wrap the 2 destroyer units. However, I did start to use them slightly differently because of a certain mission where I had to put them on objectives. It didn't quite work so well doing that. I think they do work better in front of those 2 destroyer units. However, I was happy with the Scarabs, and the Wraiths. Let's talk about the Wraiths. Was I happy with them? Wraiths are very fast. Tick. Wraiths have the 4+ invulnerable save. Tick. Wraiths have a good amount of attacks, and their -2 AP and 2 damage is fantastic. Tick. Wraiths against Orcs. Cross. I found they're not so good against Orcs, mainly because of that ramshackle rule. Taking their damage down just to 1 as opposed to 2 makes a big difference. However, against 2 wounded miniatures, maybe, if they were against Marines with 2 wounds, they'd be fantastic. So yeah, against Orcs, not so great. However, I think on the whole, the unit is a good choice. I'm happy with them, and they do a lot more than just kill things. I mean, I was using these to take objectives I did a few slingshot moves where I assaulted a unit to get closer to my opponent's deployment zone, and then in the next turn I just basically fell back and got onto some backfield objectives, and actually that move won me the game. So Wraiths I'm going to keep in the list, even though they're not the greatest against Orcs, which is my main opponent, so I could potentially swap them out. But I'm trying to make an all-comers list, and I think the Wraiths, as an all-comer unit, is actually very good, and I'm very happy with them. And obviously, they, as I said, they do a lot more than just kill things. Survivability, speed, and having that invulnerable save. You know, it's a good unit if you want to distract somebody from shooting what we're going to look at next, my destroyers. Wraiths potentially could do that. Okay, so then we're into the heavy support slot, and this basically finalises out the initial list. I had 2 units of 6 destroyers with Gauss cannons, and a unit, one heavy Gauss destructor in that unit, so a unit of 7. That's a big unit. The idea was to have a big unit, allowing me to have obviously a good amount of shooting and allowing me to keep bringing back models with the rights of reanimation. The only issue that I had was in some games, especially the game where I didn't put the scarabs in front of them, or I had to put them on objectives, is they got assaulted. And with no Royal Warden in the list, that really did take away quite a bit of my shooting. I had to make sure I had the fall back and shoot command protocol at the right time, allowing me to obviously do that. A Royal Warden potentially in this list was always thoughts from the outset, but getting him into the list with only 2 HQ slots, because I didn't really want to take a patrol detachment as well. I wanted to keep this as 1 detachment just to make things easy, and also because I'm using 2 command points on Thrall of the Silent King, I only have 7 points left anyway. Let's have a quick chat about the secondary. So we had battlefield supremacy, where either engage on all fronts, stranglehold, or purge the vermin, depending on my opponent. My no mercy one would have been grind them down, because the list is about killing things. And then my third one would either be bring it down or ancient machineries, depending again on the list that I was up against and maybe the mission. I haven't as yet played ancient machineries with this army, and I think the main reason for that is I don't like the fact that you have to wait a whole turn before you actually get the points, and it's all objective driven. So I've tended to go for bring it down, grind them down, and then engage on all fronts, stranglehold, purge the vermin. They're all good depending on the mission. So that was my original list and my thoughts about it after playing a few games. So let's have a look at the changes I've made and my thought process around them. So here we go, the Necrons list 2, and I'm sticking with the Soldiers Dynasty, so objective secure and the pre-game move. And I'm also sticking with an Outrider detachment for reasons that I just talked about. HQ, the Catacomb Command Barge is still in the list. I liked how he performed and what he did on the table, and I think it's very useful in this list. I like the speed and the ability to buff the Wraiths and potentially buff other things if I need him to. Like I said, Illuminor underperformed and he is out. We now have 2 Technomancers in the list, which does give me 3 HQs, but of course I can take 1 Cryptech for free. Well, not free points, but obviously it's a free slot, allowing me to have 2 Cryptechs in the list. So yeah, 2 Technomancers, they pretty much can do what Illuminor did, with the exception of obviously buffing units, but we can bring back units, and as an addition to that, you can help with living metal, which Illuminor couldn't do. So we can bring back D3 wounds at the end of the movement phase. So all in all, I think a better choice, but more importantly, it's going to free up my destroyers, so I could have my destroyers at one flank and right the way over the other side of the table on the other flank if I want to. They don't have to work together, and I think that's going to really help the list. So let's move on. Let's just get the mouse working. Right, there we go. Okay, so in the Elite choice, we actually have no change. As I said, I did consider reducing the Scorpack destroyers down, but with the points changes, I think 120 points is not a great investment. I could potentially bring them down to 3 if I wanted to squeeze a few more points out of the list, and potentially I could have increased that size of unit if I wanted to make them more attacking, but they still have that counter-attack role, and if I do want to attack them, which actually I do in a battle report which is just coming up on the channel, I actually use them slightly differently and I use them to attack. 4, it's still reasonable, so I think it's got a good mix of models in a unit for this particular list. And then we have the flayed ones still in the list again. For 90 points, 9 flayed ones. And it gives me a few options. I've got something to come in from reserve, a little sort of unit in my pocket as such, and of course they are infantry. They could potentially do actions, and of course they are an elite slot. All my other slots are pretty filled up, so I haven't got too much choice in terms of extra units in the list. The fast attack again is fully booked up. However, we have made some changes. So the 2 units of wraiths, I've got 6 in each one. I did consider bringing those down to units of 5. However, I think I still need 6 in the unit. It does make me slightly susceptible to the blast weapon. And maybe going forward, if I want to squeeze some more points out of the list, I could go down to 5. From what I've seen in the game so far, 6 is enough to make them survivable. When I played games, I've lost maybe 4 in a round of shooting, and then with the Technomancer I'd be able to get 1 back up. That gives me 3, and that's still a good amount of miniatures on the table to actually do some work. I just feel if I go down to 5, it's just not quite going to be enough in the unit. Plus, it's another unit to easily kill. Well, not easily kill, but having less models in the unit potentially stops me getting grinds them down quite as easy, because, well, my units are easier to kill. However, I have reduced the unit sizes of my Scarab Swarms. I have that unit of 6 for the backfield objective still, but my 2 units of 9 I've reduced down to 2 units of 7. And there's a reason for that. Is I felt without Illuminor there, now bearing in mind that Illuminor does have a gun. It didn't do much in my games, but he does have a gun, which without that gun there, the only real guns that I have, apart from the command barge, is the 2 units of destroyers. And that extra gun from Illuminor was, useful to have, maybe just to finish a unit off if the destroyers didn't quite do it. So I felt I needed more guns in the list. Now I did consider maybe the what's it called? Triarch Stalker, that's what it's called. I did consider the Triarch Stalker because he would sit in the Elite's slot. However, I came up with Tomb Blades, mainly because they have the speed. They are now a new core unit, so I can hopefully take advantages of that. And I thought a unit of 5 would be quite a nice unit to have, just to give me a few extra shots. They have the Gauss weapons because they are obviously a reasonable range, especially with the speed, and I've gone for the looms to give me that 5+ invulnerable save, and the veins to give me the 3+ save. They come in at 190 points. Now I'm aware that Tomb Blades potentially can go down fairly quickly, even with that -1 to hit rule. If they get targeted, just 2 wounds, they are a little fragile. However, I think they bring an extra element to the list which I didn't have before. These guys, again, they're not just going to go out and just attack everything. I'm going to try to hide them at the beginning of the game, and I'm going to use them tactically. I'm not going to be too aggressive with them, and if my opponent sort of wants to kill these Tomb Blades, because they are, well, if they shoot, you know, they can do some damage. If they want to kill them, then it means they're taking their firepower away from my Wraiths and my Destroyers. So the Tomb Blades, I think, are quite a nice addition, just to give me that extra speed, give me that extra ability to do some more shooting, which I lacked without Illuminor in the list. So that's what I was thinking there. Now the drop in the Scarabs down to 7, I felt that 9, they survived very well, if not too well, if that makes sense. But I just thought I could drop these down to 7 and they could do exactly the same job as 9 would. I found that my opponent could either just wipe out my Scarabs very easily, or they struggled. And I think having 7 or 9, well, I'm going to be in that same position. They're going to either be able to wipe out the unit easy, or they're going to struggle. I'm going to keep an eye on it, so when I play my next games, I'm going to make a note of the Scarabs and how they die, and whether having more in there would have made much difference in that particular turn. So 7 in each is the way I went. That helped me free up points to maintain the flayed ones in the list, which I thought was a nice addition, but also to add in those Tomb Blades. However, I had to make some changes also to my heavy support. So let's have a quick look at those. So my heavy support, whilst the Destroyers came down in points, I've also reduced the quantity. Now during the games I was thinking maybe come down to a unit of 5 to help with things like unit coherency and also the anti-blast weapon rules. However, I think that's just not enough Destroyers, not for how I want to use them. So I've gone for a unit of 5 plus the heavy Destroyer, so basically I've dropped a Destroyer in each unit. It's just 3 less shots and it's 3 less wounds in the unit. A little bit like the Scarabs. I think it's not going to make much difference. I'm still going to have a good amount of shooting and I'm still going to be very survivable, unless someone can just wipe the unit out in one turn, in which case it's not going to make much difference if I've got one more Destroyer or not. That's the thinking behind it, but again I'm going to play this list and assess whether those unit drops of size are going to actually impact the list. Personally, I don't think it will. So we're coming in at 2,000 points exactly, and again we've got 7 CPs. In terms of my secondaries, I am sticking pretty much with what I had before with the new chapter approved missions. So engage on all fronts and stranglehold will be the main 2, especially against orcs. Of course, purge the vermin is great when you're not playing orcs and they've got like thousands of miniatures on the table. If you're up against a more elite army, purge the vermin works perfectly, and I actually played purge against the Thousand Suns. I'm still going to go for grind them down because it matches the list well. Arguably, my new list is a little bit more susceptible to grind them down because I've got more units and slightly smaller units. However, I think it's the right secondary for this list because I am going to be trying to kill stuff, and obviously if you're going second, grind them down is more useful because you can see how many units your opponent has killed to how many units you need to kill to take that point. If you're going first, it's a little bit sort of in the air of how many units you need to kill, but I think it works quite well. And for this list, in the no mercy sort of slot, I don't have too many other choices. My third one will be either Bring It Down or Ancient Machineries, once again depending on my opponent, but the third one is more changeable, so I might take, say, Assassinate if there's lots of characters, etc. So that is my new list. Let me know your thoughts on the list, and if you enjoyed this format of video, press the like button so I know you enjoyed it, and then I can make some more. In the meantime, here is the video on my original list, and here are some battle reports featuring the old core list.